So, hello BookTube, I am back with another video, and this time by popular demand, or rather because I was tagged by a lovely person in the comments, you know who you are. I am here to do the Bookish Boxes and Buzzwords Tag, which was originally made by Lizzie Faye Loves Books, and I'll leave a link to the original video down below. And it's basically a series of questions to figure out more about your reading tastes, or show them to your viewers. And the first question is, what is your go-to genre or type of book? And there we run into the first problem for this tag, is that I don't really have a go-to genre as such. There are many different books I like. And I thought as an illustration of that, I might go through this pile of books here beside my chair, which are the books that I've most recently purchased and that didn't fit into my bookcase anymore. You will not know that problem. So on that we find Guernica, historical fiction set in the Basque Country before, during and after the Spanish Civil War, which I didn't pick myself, was a book club pick for the real life book club I'm a member of, but which I'm reading at the moment. We have Frankenstein in Baghdad, which I just finished. A video on that will be coming up, but I'm buddy reading that, so I want to discuss with my buddy reading partner first. Then, recent purchase The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, classic sci-fi novel. We have Deep Sea and Foreign Going, which is a non-fiction book about the shipping industry, which explains how all the stuff that you make use of gets to you. We have Niall Ferguson, The Square and the Tower, which is a history from the point of view of hierarchies and social networks and how they played a role in history. I have a feeling I might not agree with all of it, but we'll see. That sounded interesting in any case. This was a birthday present from my parents, which is the writings of Nikola Tesla, some kind of autobiographical stuff / essays, I think. Yeah, he's an interesting fellow that I don't know too much about, so looking forward to reading it him. We have Norman Davies, Beneath Another Sky, which is, from what I understood by looking through it at the bookshop, it's kind of a travel log where he travels around the world and then writes semi-random essays, thoughts, memoirs, historical information about the places he visits. I have no idea who Norman Davies is, but it sounded like an interesting concept, and I was kind of paging through it, and it looked like all kinds of interesting, random, semi-random facts about all kinds of places around the world, including ones that I don't know too much about, so that sounded like my cup of tea, and I got it. We have Culture and Imperialism by Edward W. Said. I really enjoyed his book Orientalism, and this is kind of a follow-up, looking at imperialism more broadly and how that is embedded in our culture. So that sounded really interesting, so went on the pile. We have Wilding. There's a little bit of history about this, is that at the last book club meeting we had, there was a long discussion whether we should read this one or Circe. In the end, Circe won out just ever so slightly. I already had read Circe, so it gave me a bit more time for other reading. But this book was really sounded fascinating. It's about an English couple who owned a farm, and they decided to let that farm return back to nature, and it's apparently all about how nature returns their farm, which sounds really interesting, and it's, I think, an interesting topic, especially as we're thinking about, you know, how to preserve a natural environment. And also, for example, in the Netherlands, there are regions where, you know, people are leaving, that are emptying, and, you know, letting that return to nature might be an interesting way to deal with that. We'll see. And then two more books I got as birthday present from my parents. One is Medieval Bodies, which is all about how people in the Middle Ages thought about bodies and considered them. And it's got all these lovely illustrations inside. So although it's a paperback, it is like full color printing. It's beautiful. So that sounds really fascinating. And finally, another book that was birthday present was Lost Enlightenment which is all about the history of Central Asia, so Iran, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, those kind of areas, I think. And yeah, from the Arab conquest to Tamerlane, so that's off the top of my head, I think about 780 to 1500-ish. So sounds really interesting because it's a place I know very little about and I would like to know more. So, as you can see, there is a very broad range of books and genres I like to read. So that list of books I just went through is a bit light on fiction. I read quite a bit more fiction than that suggests, because that was mainly non-fiction. But yeah, in terms of go-to genres, I'd say literary fiction, not too interested in general fiction, but that is a blurry boundary. But more literary fiction I read quite a bit. And I enjoy fantasy and science fiction, although lately I haven't read that much fantasy. I think I've been turned off by modern fantasy's trend, or it seems that way when you go to the bookshop, of only publishing a story when it can fill several thousand-page volumes, and I want to read other stuff as well. So literary fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, those are my real go-to genres, but I'm pretty eclectic. I read just about anything. If it sounds like it's an interesting story that will keep me entertained or give me food for thought, or that was influential on general culture and therefore I feel like I should read it to know what the fuss is all about. And one of the bonus questions was things I avoid. Well, yeah, I guess I don't think I've ever read a romance novel. I don't read too much. I don't read much horror. And I have read some thrillers and crime in the past, and I don't consciously avoid them, but I don't really seek them out when I'm looking for new books to buy. So all those genres, not something I particularly have against them, just I'm not really drawn to reading in them. So when I go to a bookshop and I see a whole bunch of books, then I first start looking in the genres that I'm more drawn to. So that's my reading. So yeah, literary fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, and non-fiction. Question number 2. What retellings are you drawn to? So, I'm not particularly drawn to retellings. Like, I think if it's a story I know and like, and you seem like you're adding something interesting to that story in your retelling, then I'm interested in checking it out, but like, it's not that if you have an Odyssey retelling, oh, I have to read that because I love the Odyssey and so I want to read all the retellings. Not really. And I think for me it's more interesting to think that there was this recent video in the Stripcover Lutz in their How to Read Books Good series. They were discussing about that all literature is in conversation and intertextuality, and that the same story gets told over and over. So it's maybe going a bit far to say that every book is a retelling. I don't think that's quite true, but for me it's interesting for any book that I read to kind of see what elements I recognize from other books or that talk to other books, and think about that, whether it's billed as a retelling or not, right? To see what the inspirations were or what kind of differences are in points of view that the author is taking. So I don't have anything against retellings. It's if a book says it's a retelling, it's not going to necessarily put me off wanting to read it, but I don't seek them out either. Number 3, what lifestyles or careers of characters do you like? I really don't care. As long as it's an interesting story, then I'm interested in reading it. I don't seek out books about doctors or about pilots or about police officers or whatever. I'd be more put off by kind of things that seem a bit too tropey or cliche, like the struggling writer. If your book is about a struggling writer, then I'm not necessarily all that interested, because it seems to be a bit tropey that all books these days are about struggling writers, which is probably not really true, but it's a feeling I have. So in terms of lifestyles, careers, if your characters seem to have a very cliche lifestyle career, that might put me off, but I don't think there's anything that particularly draws me. places and settings. I am interested in books that take place in places and settings that I don't know too much about, and that sound like they will show me some more about the place. Small spoiler alert for my upcoming review on Frankenstein in Baghdad. I really enjoyed how that gave me a new view of what life in Baghdad is like. So yeah. Also, I want to try and read more African literature, although you won't see that from the pile of books I just recently bought. Because I feel like I have a very distorted view of what life in Africa is really like, and I hope that by reading more African literature I will get a different view of that. But when I'm looking for new books to buy, I don't really look for books about a specific place or a setting. Maybe it's a good place to talk about how I buy books and select which books I want to read. And this is partially drawn from the fact that when I grew up I was raised bilingually, but I was born and lived for the first 30 years of my life in the Netherlands. And that meant that bookshops with a large selection of English language books were a long journey away. So it was something that only happened like once or twice a year. We went to the big English bookshop. There's a big Waterstones in Amsterdam. And then when I moved to Delft to study, there's a bookshop in Rotterdam, Donner, which has a large selection of English books. There's also the American Book Center in Amsterdam and The Hague. But yeah, it was always a bit of an expedition, and so an event to go to the bookshop. And then I always ended up, buying books in bulk rather than just one or two, because it was something that only happened, once every 6 to 12 months. And so usually what happens is I would go to the bookshop. I have a thought in my mind, like there are one or two books that I've been hearing a lot about recently and that I feel like I should read at this point in my life to know what the fuss is about. It's not necessarily new releases. Actually quite often there weren't new releases, so before joining BookTube I wasn't caught up too much in the hype and buzz about new books. But it could be like, I've never read David Copperfield and I feel like I really should because people go on and on about it. Or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, was an author I'd kind of heard quite a lot and mentioned quite a bit, that people like him or were influenced by him, so that eventually pushed me to buy Love in the Time of Colour when I saw it at some point in the bookshop. So I have these kind of vague thoughts in the back of my head that there are certain authors that I want to read, or I might have an idea of certain genres, like, I haven't read any good sci-fi in a while, so focus a bit more on getting some more sci-fi books than I would otherwise. But I always try to make a balance of different genres and different authors. And then I just go to the bookshop and browse. I can happily spend a couple of hours in the bookshop browsing. And just, whatever stands out to me, I'll walk along the shelf. Maybe there's a cover that stands out and makes me want to find out more about the book. Maybe there's a name of an author that I recognize and think, I haven't read anything by that author, or I've read a couple and I need to read some more. And that's how I select my books. And then, once I'm interested, I'll pick up a book, I'll read the blurb on the back. I don't really care about the review part of the blurb, because obviously that's selected to make you think the book is wonderful. So if some random newspaper said the book was excellent, and especially one-word blurbs, I really could care less. Or couldn't care less, even. But the short story summary, plot synopsis thingy, that I often read to see if it sounds like it's about something that would interest me. And what would interest me, can be very broad. If it's about a failed marriage or failing marriage and about a struggling author, then I'm probably turned off because it just feels kind of cliche and not something I care too much about. But other than that, if I find it a bit hard to say what I'm drawn to, but because it can be so many things. But if I'm drawn to it, then I usually kind of open up the book and read a paragraph at random just to see if the writing style appeals to me. And if that looks good, then the book goes in my bag to or in the shopping basket, let's say. But yeah, so that means that all these buzzwords and questions about what attracts you to books don't apply too much. So having said that, let's go on with question number 5. Relationships. What kind of relationships do you like to read about? not something I look for again. Like I said, the failing marriage of middle-aged people is likely to put me off a book, as in something I'm not interested in reading about. But other than that, yeah, so I'm not too interested in love stories. So if the main selling point of the book is that it's about a specific relationship or it's a romancy novel, then it's probably not going to interest me too much. Other than that, I'm happy to read about all kinds of relationships, or no relationships at all, or just friendships, or professional relationships, or romantic relationships, whatever. As long as the story as a whole sounds like it's good, that's what I'm here for. Number 6, buzzwords. Can't really think of particular buzzwords that draw me to a book. Yeah, like I said, my reading tastes are very broad. If I think a book was influential, but that's not necessarily a buzzword you find in the book, but if I've heard a lot of people say that this author influenced them in the past, or changed, had a major cultural impact, then I would be drawn to the book to kind of read it and feel like the fuss is about. So a good example is Le Guin. So if you follow sci-fi discussions, you often hear her name mentioned. You get people saying about how influential she was. These books are from Left Hand of Darkness, I think early 60s, maybe late 60s. And people are still talking about it, so I think, okay, that's a book I need to find out what the fuss is about. And for Left Hand of Darkness helped because I read The Dispossessed, which I reviewed a couple of months ago, and really loved, so there was an extra impetus to get this one. But yeah, so in that sense, influential maybe is a buzzword. Of course, it doesn't actually say influential on the book, but if a book is, in that sense, influential, culturally impactful, that would probably eventually draw me to a book. Other than that, Man Booker shortlisted or winner might draw me to a book and at least get me to kind of check it out and see if I'm interested in reading it. By check out, I mean read the blurb and maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs at random from the text. I don't really do research in terms of reading reviews or going on to Goodreads and whatever. I certainly don't care about Goodreads ratings because they all tend to fall in 3.5 to 4.5 range. So yeah, and my book buying habits were formed from the days when I didn't have a smartphone yet. So when you were in the bookshop and the book looked interesting, you couldn't look up a review. So. But other than that, there are no real buzzwords I'm drawn to. Question number 7, covers. I could say that I don't care about the cover at all, but that is dishonest. I think the main feature of the cover is, so a cover needs to draw my eye when I'm in the bookshop, and there are 20 million books that I could be looking at. So a cover that draws my eye somehow by its aesthetics, by exuding a certain atmosphere that I'm drawn to. That would help. So what kind of covers do I like? I kind of like the new Penguin Classics kind of stylized photographs, and kind of the care that goes into covers, I'd say. But let's see if there are any covers in here that I like. So this one is really cool just because it's really colorful and intricate and detailed. Would probably have drawn my eye, although of course this was a gift. So I think this is quite a stylish cover, but this book I was drawn to by the title, or by knowing the book rather than by the cover. Are there any good covers? Yeah, so it'd be dishonest to say I'm not influenced by the cover, but I don't do cover buys. The cover just needs to somehow speak to me and suggest maybe a certain atmosphere from the book, and just get enough of my interest that I pick up the book and turn it over to the back and read what it's about. And if that sounds interesting, then the cover has done its job, and that's all I really care about the cover. You know, and I definitely have aesthetic appreciation for nice covers, but that is separate from my desire to read the book or not. Number 8, what kind of non-fiction do you read? I read a lot of non-fiction. Well, as you could see in the list that I went through, I'm interested in a lot of history, especially history of places I didn't learn about in school. So Africa, although I haven't found many good history books about Africa, most of them, if you go to the bookshops and go to the African history shelf, which is A, very small, and B, seems to start in about 1960 when the independence movement started, and then mainly seems to be about how various corrupt politicians have kind of destroyed the various economies, insofar as there were economies to destroy after the end of colonialism. But there's a lot more to the history of Africa. You know, there were huge medieval kingdoms in Mali, in Congo. There's the kingdom of Benin in what is now Nigeria as well as Benin. There was all the trade in Eastern Africa with, you know, the Indian Ocean trade with India, with the Arab world. And all of that I vaguely know exists, and other than that I know nothing about, and I really wish someone would write an interesting history about that, instead of book number 523 about the Second World War. Not that I'm not interested in the Second World War, and I've definitely read books about that, but, you know, there's more to the world, and I'd really like to know more about that without really having to wade into a dire scholarly work or scholarly articles. Other than that, I'm interested in popular science, astronomy, cosmology, physics, things like that. Although what I do find is that because I'm or an engineer, so I have a background in engineering, I know a reasonable amount of maths, probably a lot of maths compared to the average person, not super much maths compared to people that are really mathematicians, who I know some of. And so a lot of popular science books leave me a bit dissatisfied because they always try to hide the maths. So there's this famous statement by Hawking that, you know, every equation you put in a book halves the seals. And so they desperately try to keep equations out of books and try to explain everything by analogy, which is fine for people who don't know maths, but the way things really work is described by the mathematical equation and not by the analogy. And the analogies always kind of break down because they have some features that the real physical property doesn't have. And so I'd like to read some more maths-heavy books about physics without it being a physics textbook, if that makes sense. So yeah, so if there's a weird jump, it's because I had to restart my camera because it's only recorded for about 20 minutes. Anyway, next question is number 9. What medical or physical conditions are you drawn to, or do you enjoy reading about in characters? Not really something I've ever thought about or taken notice of. If it's a book that seems like it wants to be emotionally manipulative and just be about, oh, this person is sick and therefore it's sad, so you will feel sad reading this, I'm probably not interested. Other than that, you know, if you have an interesting story to tell about that happens to feature a person or is about a person with a certain medical condition, then cool. But not something I particularly seek out. And the same for number 10, time of year, period in history or the future that you like reading about, any and all. Also not too much of a mood reader, like I don't necessarily want to read a book about autumn when it's autumn, or want to read a book about summer when it's summer. I'll happily read a book set in the middle of winter when it's summer. I don't mind too much. Like, you know, the atmosphere of the book can match and might influence a bit when I'm selecting which book I want to read next, but it's not too much on my mind. So, and then there are some bonus questions, which are any other boxes or buzzwords that you can think of, which I don't have, and any buzzwords which turn you off. And I think the main one is, and it's especially in the kind of non-fiction self-help genres of books, people that put their title on their book. So when a book is written by blah 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 PhD or blah 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 MBA, even worse potentially, that tends to turn me off quite a lot. Which is somewhat odd, because I have a PhD myself and I enjoy using that title when appropriate. Like, it makes me a little bit happy that when I get my bank statement mailed to me from the bank, it is addressed to Dr. John Allen Pascoe. Because, you know, I worked hard for 4 years to earn that title, and so I enjoy getting the chance to use it here and there. But I also don't think it means that I'm a better person than anyone else, and I definitely don't think it means that I therefore know everything there is to know about the topic. And so when I see especially self-help books, you know, written by blah 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 PhD, it always makes me slightly suspicious that I'm supposed to buy this book and gobble it all up because this person happens to have a PhD, rather than because they have a persuasive argument that what they're saying is actually correct. Right? And if you read scientific articles in scientific journals, you will see that they never print the titles, or at least not in any of the journals I'm familiar with, right? Because you're supposed to present evidence and convince the reader on the basis of your evidence, and not on the basis of you being a doctor or a professor. And so, and especially on advice-giving books, people putting titles behind their name makes me instantly suspicious and probably turns me off from buying the book in the first place. So, having said all of that, I realize it might have been a bit of a disappointment in regards to this tag, because most of the questions, my answer was, I don't care, whatever, because yeah, I read very eclectically, very broadly. I enjoy that, like I enjoy reading about lots of different things and getting to learn and see lots of different perspectives. And getting to, you know, see influential books that were influential on our culture and on each other, and changed, you know, new things to say about the stories we tell, and new perspectives on, you know, characters and character tropes. But yeah, that also means that the way I pick out which books I want to read doesn't really match with these questions. So nevertheless, I hope this was an interesting video for you, and that you get a bit more insight into my reading tastes and how I pick my books. And yeah, any thoughts you would like to discuss with me, please leave them down below in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you soon for my next video. Bye bye.